The wind howled across the frozen landscape of Montana's Glacier National Park, like a wild beast hungry for destruction. Snow fell so thick that visibility dropped to mere feet, and the temperature plummeted to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It was the kind of blizzard that locals called a white death, the type that could swallow entire search parties and leave no trace behind. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera pulled his tactical coat tighter around his muscular frame as he stepped out of the military transport vehicle. His breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air, and ice crystals immediately began forming on his dark beard. At 32 years old, Marcus had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, but nothing had quite prepared him for the brutal cold of this Montana wilderness. Beside him, his loyal companion Thor shook the snow from his thick German Shepherd coat. The 4-year-old military working dog had been Marcus's partner for over 2 years, and together they had saved countless lives in combat zones across the Middle East. Thor's keen nose had detected over 50 improvised explosive devices, and his unwavering loyalty had earned him a reputation as one of the finest K-9 units in the Marine Corps. The emergency call had come in 3 hours earlier. 2 FBI agents investigating a drug trafficking ring had gone missing during what should have been a routine surveillance operation in the remote wilderness. Agent Sarah Chen and Agent David Martinez had last made radio contact at 1400 hours, reporting they were pursuing suspects through the treacherous mountain terrain. When they failed to check in at their scheduled time, the FBI immediately contacted the nearest military installation for search and rescue assistance. Marcus studied the GPS coordinates on his handheld device, his experienced eyes scanning the hostile environment. The storm had arrived faster than meteorologists predicted, transforming what should have been a straightforward rescue mission into a life-or-death race against time. Every minute that passed in these conditions reduced the chances of finding the agents alive. "Thor, heel," Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the wind. The intelligent dog immediately moved to his left side, his amber eyes alert and ready for action. Even in these brutal conditions, Thor showed no signs of hesitation or fear. The bond between the Marine and his K-9 partner had been forged through countless dangerous missions, and each trusted the other with their life. The local sheriff, a weathered man named Bill Patterson, approached through the swirling snow. His face was grim, etched with the concern that came from 30 years of mountain rescues. "Sergeant Rivera, I've got to be honest with you. This storm is unlike anything we've seen in a decade. My boys and I know these mountains better than anyone, but we've already had to call back 2 search teams. The visibility is 0 and the wind chill is dropping fast." Marcus nodded respectfully, but his jaw remained set with determination. "Sheriff, I understand the risks, but those agents are counting on us. Thor and I have operated in conditions most people wouldn't survive. We've tracked insurgents through sandstorms in Iraq and located survivors in collapsed buildings. This is what we're trained for." Sheriff Patterson studied the young Marine's face, seeing the steely resolve that marked a true warrior. "I respect that, son, but this wilderness doesn't care about your training or your medals. These mountains have claimed experienced hikers, seasoned hunters, and even my own deputies over the years. The terrain is unforgiving even in good weather." The wind suddenly intensified, causing everyone to brace against its fury. Snow whipped around them like tiny missiles, and the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Marcus felt the sting of ice crystals against his exposed skin, but his focus never wavered from the mission ahead. Thor's ears perked up suddenly, and he turned his head toward the northwest. The dog's exceptional senses often detected things long before humans could perceive them. Marcus immediately recognized the behavior and placed a gloved hand on his partner's head. "What is it, boy? You picking up something?" The German Shepherd's nose twitched as he processed the countless scents carried on the wind. Despite the overwhelming smell of snow, pine, and ice, Thor's trained senses were capable of detecting human scent from remarkable distances. His body language shifted slightly, indicating he had indeed caught something of interest. "Sheriff, we need to move now," Marcus said, shouldering his heavy pack filled with survival gear, medical supplies, and emergency equipment. Thor's indicating northwest, and his nose has never led us wrong. If those agents are out there, we're running out of time to reach them before hypothermia sets in. The sheriff looked at the deteriorating conditions and made a difficult decision. "I'm calling off the ground search teams for their own safety, but I won't stop you if you're determined to go. You know these mountains better than most visitors. But remember that rescue becomes recovery real fast in weather like this. Marcus checked his equipment one final time. Emergency shelter, medical kit, thermal blankets, flares, radio equipment, and enough food and water for 24 hours. His M4 carbine was secured across his chest, loaded and ready. In wilderness rescue situations, you never knew what dangers might be lurking beyond the immediate threat of weather. Thor, search, Marcus commanded, using the German phrase they had practiced thousands of times. The dog immediately began working, his nose low to the ground despite the accumulating snow. Even in these impossible conditions, Thor's training and instincts kicked in automatically. As they began their trek into the white wilderness, Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with dangerous missions. The howling wind attempted to disorient them, and the snow continued falling so heavily that their tracks disappeared within minutes. But Marcus had learned long ago to trust in his training, his equipment, and most importantly, his four-legged partner. The fate of two federal agents now rested in the hands of a Marine and his loyal K9, venturing into one of nature's most deadly environments. Time was running out, and with each passing moment, the chances of a successful rescue diminished. But Marcus Rivera had never abandoned a mission, and he wasn't about to start now. Somewhere in this frozen wasteland, two people were fighting for their lives, and he would find them or die trying. The frozen wilderness stretched endlessly before Marcus and Thor as they pushed deeper into the heart of the blizzard. Every step forward required tremendous effort, as they fought against knee-deep snowdrifts and winds that threatened to knock them off their feet. The temperature had dropped to -25 degrees, and the wind chill made it feel like -40. In these conditions, exposed skin could develop frostbite in less than 10 minutes. Thor's powerful legs churned through the snow with remarkable determination. His thick double coat provided excellent insulation, but even he was beginning to show signs of strain. Ice crystals had formed around his muzzle and eyes. Yet the dedicated German shepherd never wavered from his search pattern. His training had taught him that human lives depended on his abilities, and he would push himself to the absolute limit to complete the mission. Marcus consulted his GPS device regularly, but the electronic signals were becoming increasingly unreliable due to the severe weather conditions. The storm was interfering with satellite reception, causing the device to lose signal for minutes at a time. He relied increasingly on his compass and his extensive wilderness survival training to maintain their general direction toward the agent's last known position. After 2 hours of grueling travel, Thor suddenly stopped and raised his head high, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air currents. The dog's behavior immediately caught Marcus's attention. Thor had detected something significant, and his body language indicated it was definitely human scent. The German shepherd's tail began wagging slightly, a sign that he had found what they were searching for. "Good boy, Thor," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Show me what you found." The dog began moving with renewed purpose, following an invisible trail that only his extraordinary senses could detect. Marcus followed closely behind, his weapon ready and his eyes scanning constantly for any signs of the missing agents. The terrain was becoming increasingly treacherous, with hidden rocks and fallen logs creating dangerous obstacles beneath the snow. As they crested a small ridge, Marcus spotted something that made his heart race. Through the swirling snow, he could barely make out the dark outline of what appeared to be an overturned vehicle in a ravine below. The FBI agent's SUV had apparently slid off the narrow mountain road during the storm, rolling down the steep embankment before coming to rest against a cluster of pine trees. Marcus immediately activated his radio, hoping to establish contact with the base station. "Base, this is Rescue 1. We've located what appears to be the missing vehicle approximately 2 clicks northwest of starting position. Proceeding to investigate, over." Static filled his earpiece, followed by broken fragments of response. The storm was interfering with radio communications, but he managed to catch enough words to confirm that his message had been received. Help would be standing by, but in these conditions, he and Thor were essentially on their own. The descent into the ravine proved extremely dangerous. The slope was steep and covered with loose snow that could trigger an avalanche. Marcus used his ice axe to create secure anchor points as they slowly worked their way down toward the crashed vehicle. Thor followed carefully, his claws providing excellent traction on the icy surface. As they approached the overturned SUV, Marcus could see that the windshield had been completely shattered, and the roof was partially crushed from the impact. Snow had already begun accumulating inside the vehicle, and there was no immediate sign of the two agents. His training kicked in as he began assessing the crash scene for clues about what had happened to the occupants. Thor began circling the vehicle, his nose working frantically to track the scents. Within moments, the dog had picked up a trail leading away from the crash site. The agents had survived the initial impact and had apparently left the vehicle on foot. This was both encouraging and terrifying news. They were alive when they left the SUV, but they were now somewhere in this deadly wilderness without proper cold weather gear. Marcus examined the crash site more carefully and found evidence that supported Thor's findings. Footprints, though partially filled with snow, led away from the vehicle toward a dense grove of evergreen trees. He also discovered that the agents had managed to retrieve some supplies from the SUV before abandoning it, including what appeared to be a small emergency kit and possibly some food items. The trail was difficult to follow in the heavy snow, but Thor's exceptional tracking abilities made the impossible seem achievable. The German Shepherd moved with confidence, occasionally stopping to recalibrate his course as he followed the increasingly faint scent trail. Marcus marveled at his partner's abilities, knowing that without Thor's nose, the agents would have no chance of being found in time. As they followed the trail deeper into the forest, Marcus began finding more encouraging signs. Broken branches indicated that the agents had passed through the area, and he discovered a piece of torn fabric caught on a low-hanging pine branch. The fabric appeared to be from a standard FBI windbreaker, confirming they were on the right track. The wind began to diminish slightly as they moved deeper into the forest, providing some relief from the brutal conditions. The tall evergreen trees offered partial protection from the driving snow, though the temperature remained dangerously low. Marcus checked his watch and realized they had been searching for over 3 hours. In these conditions, the agents would be approaching the critical stages of hypothermia if they hadn't found adequate shelter. Thor suddenly became more excited, his pace quickening as the scent trail grew stronger. The dog's behavior indicated they were getting close to their target. Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with concern. Finding the agents quickly was crucial, but their condition after hours in this brutal weather remained unknown. The forest began to thin out ahead of them, revealing a small clearing dominated by a massive granite boulder formation. Thor's excitement reached a peak as he approached the rocks, his tail wagging furiously despite the exhausting conditions. Marcus realized that the agents had likely sought shelter among the rocks, using the natural formation to protect themselves from the worst of the storm. As they reached the base of the boulder formation, Marcus could hear something that made his heart leap with hope, the faint sound of human voices coming from somewhere within the rocky shelter. The agents were alive, but their calls sounded weak and desperate. Time was running out, and whatever condition they were in, immediate medical attention would be critical for their survival. The voices grew clearer as Marcus and Thor approached the granite boulder formation. Between the gaps in the massive rocks, Marcus could see the faint glow of what appeared to be a small fire or emergency light. The agents had managed to create some form of shelter, which explained how they had survived this long in the deadly conditions. "Hello, this is Staff Sergeant Rivera, United States Marines."
"Can you hear me?"
Marcus called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. A weak but unmistakably relieved voice responded from within the rocky shelter. "Thank God." "We're here!" "Agent Chen and Agent Martinez, FBI. We've been trapped for over 6 hours." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but his military training kept him focused on the immediate challenges ahead. Finding the agents was only the first step. Getting them out alive in these conditions would require every ounce of his survival expertise. Thor remained close by his side, panting heavily from the exhausting search but still alert and ready for action. "I'm coming in. Stay calm and stay warm," Marcus shouted back as he began searching for an entrance to their makeshift shelter. The boulder formation created a natural cave-like structure, with several narrow openings between the massive granite slabs. Marcus found the main entrance and squeezed through the tight space, with Thor following close behind. The difference in temperature was immediate and welcome. While still freezing, the shelter provided crucial protection from the deadly wind and driving snow. Inside the rocky refuge, Marcus found the 2 FBI agents huddled together around a small emergency candle. Agent Sarah Chen, A petite Asian-American woman in her early 30s was conscious but clearly suffering from the early stages of hypothermia. Her lips had a bluish tint, and she was shivering uncontrollably despite being wrapped in what appeared to be emergency blankets fashioned from their coats and some reflective material. Agent David Martinez was in worse condition. The tall, muscular Latino man was semi-conscious, mumbling incoherently as his body fought against the effects of severe cold exposure. His skin had a dangerous pallor and his breathing was shallow and irregular. Marcus immediately recognized the signs of advanced hypothermia. Without immediate warming and medical intervention, Agent Martinez might not survive the night. Agent Chen, I'm Marcus Rivera. This is my partner Thor. We're here to get you both out of this situation, Marcus said as he quickly assessed their condition and the shelter they had created. Can you tell me what happened and how long Agent Martinez has been like this? Agent Chen's teeth chattered as she tried to speak. Our vehicle hit ice on the mountain road during the storm. We rolled down into the ravine and managed to crawl out, but David hit his head pretty hard during the crash. We've been here about 4 hours and he's been getting worse over the last hour. Marcus nodded grimly as he unpacked his emergency medical supplies. The situation was critical but not hopeless. His combat medic training had taught him how to treat hypothermia in field conditions, and he carried specialized equipment designed for exactly this type of emergency rescue situation. Thor, down and stay, Marcus commanded. The German shepherd immediately lay down near the entrance, positioning himself to serve as both a lookout and an additional source of warmth for the small group. Marcus began working quickly but methodically. From his pack, he retrieved advanced hypothermia treatment supplies including chemical heating pads, thermal blankets designed for military use, and emergency medications. He also pulled out a compact field stove and began heating water for warm drinks, crucial for raising the agent's core body temperature safely. Agent Chen, I need you to help me with Agent Martinez. We need to get his wet clothing off and get him into dry thermal layers. Hypothermia treatment requires immediate action, but we have to be careful not to warm him too quickly, or it could cause cardiac complications. Working together, they carefully removed Agent Martinez's ice-soaked clothing and wrapped him in the military-grade thermal blankets. Marcus activated several chemical heating pads and placed them strategically around the agent's torso, being careful to avoid direct skin contact that could cause burns to his cold, numb skin. Agent Chen, despite her own condition, proved to be a capable assistant. Her FBI training had included basic medical response, and she followed Marcus's instructions precisely. As they worked, she explained more about their situation and the events that led to their predicament. We were following up on intelligence about a drug trafficking operation using these remote mountain areas as a distribution point. When the storm hit, we tried to get back to the main road, but visibility dropped to 0. David was driving when we hit that patch of ice, and there was nothing he could do. Marcus continued his medical assessment while listening to her report. Agent Martinez's pulse was weak but steady, and his breathing was beginning to stabilize as his body temperature slowly started to rise. The thermal treatment was working, but he would need professional medical care as soon as possible. The good news is that you both made smart decisions after the crash, Marcus told Agent Chen as he prepared warm drinks on his portable stove. Finding this shelter and creating a heat source probably saved your lives. Many people panic in situations like this and make decisions that get them killed. Thor suddenly raised his head and let out a low growl, his ears pointed toward the shelter entrance. His military training had taught him to detect approaching threats, and something outside had caught his attention. Marcus immediately reached for his weapon while motioning for Agent Chen to remain quiet. The sound of voices could be heard approaching their location, but they were not rescue voices. These voices were speaking in hushed, urgent tones, and Marcus could make out at least 3 different men. His combat instincts told him that something was very wrong with this situation. Agent Chen, Marcus whispered urgently, were you being pursued when you crashed? Could the people you were investigating have followed you out here? Agent Chen's eyes widened with alarm as she realized the implications. It's possible. We had been tracking them for weeks, and they might have discovered our surveillance. If they followed us and saw the crash, Marcus's mind raced through the tactical possibilities. They were trapped in a confined space with a semi-conscious federal agent, limited visibility due to the storm, and unknown hostile forces approaching their position. The situation had just transformed from a rescue mission into a potential combat scenario, and the lives of two federal agents now depended on his military training and Thor's protective instincts. The voices outside grew louder and more distinct as the unknown men approached the rocky shelter. Marcus could now make out at least 4 different speakers, and their conversation confirmed his worst fears. These were not rescuers. They were the very criminals that Agents Chen and Martinez had been investigating. "The tracks lead this way," one voice called out through the howling wind. "They definitely came through here after the crash. We need to find them before anyone else does." Another voice, rougher and more aggressive, responded with chilling clarity. "Boss wants this cleaned up tonight. No witnesses, no evidence. The storm gives us perfect cover. Everyone will think they just got lost in the blizzard." Marcus felt his blood run cold as he realized the full scope of the danger they faced. The drug traffickers had indeed followed the FBI agents and were now closing in on their location with lethal intent. Agent Martinez was barely conscious. Agent Chen was suffering from hypothermia, and they were all trapped in a confined space with limited escape routes. Thor's growl became more pronounced as he sensed the approaching threat. The German Shepherd's military training had prepared him for combat situations, and his protective instincts were now fully activated. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his partner's head while his mind calculated their tactical options. "Agent Chen," Marcus whispered urgently, "do you have your service weapon?" She nodded weakly and pointed to her holster. "Glock 19, full magazine, but my hands are so cold I can barely feel the trigger. How many rounds do you have?" Marcus quickly inventoried his ammunition. 2 full magazines plus what's loaded. "Thor is trained for combat operations, but I need you to stay with Agent Martinez and keep him warm no matter what happens out there." The footsteps were getting closer now, and Marcus could hear the men spreading out around the boulder formation. They were conducting a systematic search, checking every possible hiding spot. It would only be minutes before they discovered the entrance to the rocky shelter. Marcus made a quick, tactical decision. Remaining trapped inside the cave-like structure would be suicide if the criminals discovered their location. His only advantage was the element of surprise and Thor's exceptional training. They needed to take the initiative before the traffickers could corner them. "Thor, attack position," Marcus whispered in the German commands they had practiced countless times in combat zones. The dog immediately shifted into a low crouch, his muscles tensed and ready for action. Years of military operations had taught Thor to remain completely silent until given the command to strike. Marcus carefully moved toward the shelter entrance, his M4 carbine ready and his finger on the trigger. Through the narrow opening, he could see the shadowy figures of at least 3 men moving through the swirling snow. They were armed with what appeared to be automatic weapons and were clearly experienced in tactical operations. The first criminal appeared directly in front of the shelter entrance, his weapon raised as he peered into the darkness between the rocks. Marcus held his breath, knowing that discovery at this point would likely result in a firefight with innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. "I think I see something in here," the man called out to his companions. "Bring the flashlight over here." Marcus knew he had seconds to act before they were discovered. He made hand signals to Thor, indicating the position of their primary target. The German Shepherd's eyes locked onto the designated threat. Every muscle in his powerful body coiled like a spring waiting to be released. As the criminal began to squeeze through the entrance to the shelter, Marcus gave Thor the attack command with a barely audible whistle. The result was instantaneous and devastating. Thor launched himself through the opening like a guided missile, his 80-pound frame striking the gunman with the force of a battering ram. The man's scream of terror and pain was immediately swallowed by the howling wind, as Thor's powerful jaws clamped down on his weapon arm. The automatic rifle went flying into the snow as the criminal crashed backward into his companions, creating chaos and confusion in their ranks. Marcus immediately followed Thor through the opening, his rifle up and ready. The blizzard provided excellent concealment as he moved through the swirling snow, using the rocky terrain to his advantage. His combat experience in Afghanistan and Iraq had taught him how to fight effectively in limited visibility conditions. "Contact. Multiple hostiles. Thor has engaged," Marcus shouted into his radio. hoping that someone at base station could hear him despite the storm interference. The remaining criminals were shouting commands and trying to regroup, but Thor's surprise attack had shattered their tactical formation. The German Shepherd continued his assault on the first gunman, whose screams indicated that he was no longer a threat to anyone. Marcus spotted the muzzle flash of an automatic weapon firing in his direction and immediately returned fire with controlled bursts from his M4. His military marksmanship training served him well as his rounds found their target, dropping the second criminal into the snow. "Miller, Rodriguez, where the hell are you?" shouted what appeared to be the group leader, his voice filled with panic and confusion. A third gunman emerged from behind a large pine tree, his weapon sweeping back and forth as he searched for targets in the blizzard. Marcus had positioned himself behind a granite boulder and had a clear line of sight to the criminal's position. "Drop your weapon, United States Marines," Marcus shouted, giving the man one opportunity to surrender. Instead of complying, the gunman spun toward Marcus's voice and opened fire with his automatic weapon. Bullets sparked off the granite rocks as Marcus ducked for cover, then immediately returned fire with deadly accuracy. His round struck center mass and the third criminal collapsed into the snow. Thor had finished neutralizing his target and immediately moved to Marcus's position, ready for further commands. The German Shepherd showed no signs of injury despite the violent encounter, his training and natural protective instincts having served him perfectly in the combat situation. Marcus conducted a quick tactical assessment of the area, scanning for any additional threats. The storm continued to rage around them, but the immediate danger appeared to be neutralized. 4 armed criminals who had come to eliminate federal witnesses were now no longer a threat to anyone. "Thor, search," Marcus commanded, directing his partner to check the area for any surviving threats or additional criminals who might be lurking nearby. As the adrenaline began to subside, Marcus realized that the situation had evolved far beyond a simple rescue mission. They had just engaged in a firefight with armed drug traffickers in the middle of a deadly blizzard, and the FBI agents were still in critical need of medical attention. The night was far from over, and getting everyone to safety would require every ounce of his military training and survival expertise. The journey back through the blizzard proved to be the most challenging test of endurance and determination that Marcus had ever faced. Carrying Agent Martinez on the improvised stretcher through knee-deep snow and howling winds pushed all 3 of them beyond their physical limits. Every step forward required tremendous effort, and the cold seemed to penetrate deeper into their bones with each passing hour. Thor proved to be their salvation during the nightmarish trek. The German Shepherd's exceptional sense of direction and ability to retrace their original scent trail guided them through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate by conventional means. Even when Marcus's compass became unreliable due to the metal in the rocky terrain, Thor's instincts kept them moving in the right direction. Agent Chen displayed remarkable courage and determination throughout the evacuation. Despite her own exhaustion and the lingering effects of hypothermia, she never complained and continuously monitored Agent Martinez's vital signs during the journey. Her voice became their lifeline, providing constant updates on his condition and encouraging words when their strength began to fail. After 4 grueling hours of fighting through the storm, Thor suddenly stopped and began barking excitedly. Through the swirling snow, the faint glow of vehicle headlights became visible in the distance. Sheriff Patterson and his rescue team had been waiting at the extraction point despite the dangerous conditions, ready to provide immediate assistance. "Over here. We've got them." Sheriff Patterson's voice cut through the wind as his team rushed forward with medical equipment and additional stretchers. The reunion at the extraction point was emotional but brief. Paramedics immediately took over Agent Martinez's care, starting IV fluids and oxygen while preparing him for emergency transport to the nearest trauma center. His condition was critical but stable, and the medical team was cautiously optimistic about his chances for recovery. Agent Chen collapsed into the back of an ambulance, her strength finally giving out after hours of pushing beyond her physical limits. The paramedics wrapped her in heated blankets and began treating her for moderate hypothermia and exhaustion. Despite her own condition, her eyes never left Agent Martinez as the medical team worked to stabilize him for transport. Marcus stood in the swirling snow, watching as his successful rescue mission came to its conclusion. Thor sat beside him, panting heavily but alert, his amber eyes reflecting the pride and satisfaction that came from completing an impossible task. The German Shepherd had performed magnificently throughout the entire operation, from tracking the missing agents to guiding them safely back through the deadly blizzard. Sheriff Patterson approached Marcus with a mixture of awe and respect. "Son, in 30 years of mountain rescue operations, I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. Carrying an injured man through that storm should have been impossible." Marcus simply nodded, his attention focused on making sure Thor was properly warmed and cared for after their ordeal. "Sheriff, it wasn't just me. This mission succeeded because we worked as a team. Agent Chen never gave up on her partner, and Thor's tracking abilities made the impossible possible." As the ambulances departed for the hospital with their lights flashing through the continuing snowfall, Marcus received word over the radio that a helicopter would be arriving shortly to transport him and Thor back to base. The storm was finally beginning to show signs of weakening, and emergency air operations were becoming feasible again. 3 weeks later, Marcus and Thor stood in the pristine corridors of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center outside Washington, D.C. They had been invited to visit Agent Martinez during his recovery, and both were eager to see how their rescue efforts had ultimately turned out. Agent Martinez was sitting up in his hospital bed when they entered the room, looking remarkably well considering the severity of his injuries. The head trauma had healed completely, and physical therapy had restored his strength after the hypothermia ordeal. His face lit up with genuine emotion when he saw his rescuers. "Sergeant Rivera, I owe you my life," Agent Martinez said, his voice thick with gratitude. "The doctors told me that another hour in those conditions would have been fatal. What you and Thor did was beyond heroic." Agent Chen was also present for the reunion, having made a complete recovery from her own ordeal. She had already returned to active duty with the FBI, and was eager to express her appreciation for their rescue. "Marcus, you taught me something important about never giving up when someone's life is on the line. That lesson will stay with me for the rest of my career." Thor, who had been sitting patiently during the conversation, suddenly approached Agent Martinez's bed and gently placed his head near the agent's hand. The German Shepherd seemed to understand that this man was someone he had helped save, and his gentle demeanor showed the intelligence and empathy that made him such an exceptional working dog. The reunion was interrupted by the arrival of several high-ranking military and FBI officials who had come to personally thank Marcus and Thor for their extraordinary service. The rescue operation had attracted national attention, and their story was being used as an example of interagency cooperation and the importance of never abandoning fellow service members or law enforcement officers. During the ceremony that followed, Marcus was presented with the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism, while Thor received a special commendation for his service as a military working dog. Agent Chen and Agent Martinez were also recognized for their professionalism and courage during the ordeal. But the most meaningful moment came when Agent Martinez struggled to his feet and offered Marcus a firm handshake. "Semper Fi Marineba," he said, using the traditional Marine Corps motto that means always faithful. Marcus returned the handshake with equal firmness. "Semper Fi, Agent Martinez. Thor and I were just doing our job." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Thor once again demonstrated the intelligence and empathy that had made him such an exceptional partner. The German Shepherd approached each of the FBI agents and gently touched their hands with his nose, as if saying goodbye to friends he had helped save. The drive back to their base was quiet, with both Marcus and Thor processing the successful conclusion to their most challenging mission. The Montana wilderness had tested them beyond their limits, but their training, determination, and unbreakable bond had enabled them to save 2 lives under impossible conditions. 6 months later, Marcus and Thor were deployed to a new assignment overseas, but they would never forget the night they fought through a deadly blizzard to rescue 2 FBI agents. The experience had strengthened their partnership and reinforced their commitment to the military values of honor, courage, and never leaving anyone behind. The story of their rescue became legendary within both the Marine Corps and the FBI, serving as inspiration for future generations of service members and law enforcement officers. It demonstrated that with proper training, unwavering determination, and the loyalty of a faithful partner, even the most impossible missions could be accomplished. Thor continued to serve with distinction for several more years, participating in numerous successful operations around the world. When he finally retired from active duty, Agent Martinez and Agent Chen personally requested to attend his retirement ceremony, honoring the dog who had saved their lives in the Montana wilderness. The bond forged between the Marine, his canine partner, and the two FBI agents during that terrible blizzard lasted for the rest of their lives, serving as a permanent reminder that true heroism comes not from individual achievement, but from the willingness to risk everything for others, regardless of the odds or the personal cost involved. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Marcus knew their situation remained extremely dangerous. The blizzard continued to rage with undiminished fury, and Agent Martinez's condition was deteriorating despite the warming treatments. They needed to get him to a hospital as quickly as possible, but evacuation in these weather conditions seemed nearly impossible. Marcus returned to the shelter where Agent Chen was doing her best to monitor Agent Martinez's vital signs. The semi-conscious agent was mumbling incoherently, and his breathing had become more labored. The head injury from the crash, combined with severe hypothermia, was creating a medical emergency that required immediate professional intervention. "How is he?" Marcus asked as he quickly checked his equipment and tried once again to establish radio contact with the base station. "Getting worse," Agent Chen replied, her own voice stronger now that her body temperature had stabilized. "His pulse is irregular, and I think he might have a serious concussion from the crash. We need to get him out of here tonight," or she didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood the gravity of the situation perfectly. Agent Martinez was running out of time, and conventional rescue operations would be impossible until the storm passed. The Weather Service was predicting that the blizzard would continue for at least another 8 hours, time that the injured agent simply didn't have. Thor returned from his security sweep and positioned himself near the shelter entrance, his keen senses still alert for any additional threats. The German Shepherd had performed flawlessly during the combat encounter, but Marcus could see that even his hardy partner was beginning to show signs of fatigue from the extreme conditions. Marcus's radio suddenly crackled to life, with a weak but intelligible transmission. "Rescue 1, this is base station. We're reading multiple gunshots on the seismic sensors. What's your status? Over. Base station Rescue 1. We've engaged and neutralized 4 hostile subjects who were attempting to eliminate the federal agents. Both agents are alive, but Agent Martinez requires immediate medical evacuation. His condition is critical. Over." The response came back filled with static but clearly concerned. "Rescue 1. Weather conditions make helicopter evacuation impossible. Ground units cannot reach your position until the storm passes. Can you stabilize the patient for extended field treatment? Over." Marcus looked at Agent Martinez's deteriorating condition and made a decision that would have seemed impossible to most people. "Base station. Negative on extended field treatment. I'm going to attempt to carry the patient out on foot. Coordinates will be my original extraction point. Thor and I will navigate by compass and GPS. Over." Rescue 1, that's a negative. Attempting to move through this terrain in these conditions with an injured person is suicide. Wait for the storm to pass. Over. But Marcus had already made up his mind. His military training had taught him that sometimes the most dangerous course of action was actually the safest, when conventional options meant certain death. Agent Martinez would not survive 8 more hours in the wilderness regardless of how well they could treat him in the field. "Agent Chen, I need you to help me create an improvised stretcher. We're going to carry Agent Martinez out of here tonight." Agent Chen stared at him in disbelief. "Sergeant, have you looked outside? The visibility is 0. The temperature is dropping, and you'd be carrying a 200-pound man through terrain that's dangerous even in good weather." "It's impossible." Marcus was already pulling materials from his pack and examining the resources available in their shelter. "Agent Chen, I've carried wounded Marines through worse conditions than this. The difference between possible and impossible is usually just a matter of how badly you want to succeed." Using his tactical rope, emergency blankets, and broken branches from outside the shelter, Marcus began constructing a makeshift stretcher designed to distribute Agent Martinez's weight evenly. His combat experience had taught him multiple techniques for evacuating wounded personnel in hostile environments. Thor watched the preparations with intelligent eyes, seeming to understand that they were about to embark on an extremely dangerous journey. The German Shepherd had never failed to complete a mission alongside his partner, and his loyalty and determination would be crucial for the success of this desperate evacuation attempt. "The key is going to be navigation," Marcus explained as he worked. The GPS is unreliable in this storm, so I'll be using dead reckoning with my compass. Thor's sense of direction is actually better than most electronic equipment, and he knows the scent trail back to our starting point. Agent Chen helped secure Agent Martinez to the improvised stretcher, making sure he was wrapped warmly and protected from the elements. Despite her own exhaustion and the effects of hypothermia, she showed the kind of determination and professionalism that made the FBI one of the world's premier law enforcement agencies. "I'm coming with you," she declared firmly. "David is my partner and I'm not leaving him." Marcus nodded with respect. "I was hoping you'd say that. This is going to require all three of us working together. Thor will lead navigation. I'll handle the heavy carrying, and you'll monitor Agent Martinez's condition during transport." As they prepared for departure, Marcus took one final look around their shelter. The granite formation had saved their lives by providing protection from the storm and concealment from the criminals. Now they were about to leave that safety and venture back into the deadly wilderness on what many would consider a suicide mission. Marcus secured his pack, checked his weapon, and gave Thor the preparatory commands for a long-distance trek. The German shepherd's tail wagged slightly despite the serious situation, indicating his readiness to follow his partner anywhere, under any conditions. "Agent Chen, once we leave this shelter, we don't stop moving until we reach the extraction point. No matter how tired we get, no matter how cold it becomes, we keep moving. Agent Martinez's life depends on maintaining forward momentum." Agent Chen nodded with grim determination. "Understood, Sergeant. Let's bring David home." As they lifted the stretcher and prepared to venture back into the blizzard, Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with dangerous missions. They were about to attempt something that violated every principle of wilderness safety. But sometimes desperate situations required desperate measures. Thor moved to the front of their small formation, ready to guide them through the storm toward safety and medical care. The wind howled around them as they emerged from the shelter, immediately reminding them of the deadly conditions they were about to face. But Marcus had never abandoned a mission. Agent Chen would never abandon her partner, and Thor would follow them both into hell if necessary. Together, they began the most dangerous journey of their lives.